Thank you everyone for joining today. We've got really good attendance today, so really looking forward to getting started. And as I get, thank you once again for joining. So my name is Michael Graham and I'm a Senior Project Manager for Trueman Change. And welcome to our April 2024 edition of our Change Chat. If you haven't been to one of these before, the way that they work is that we pick a particular topic, pull together an excellent panel, which we have done today, and then we provide you with tips and expertise on that topic. As I say, if you've been before, we want and we like these sessions to be really informal, but we also try and make them as interactive as possible. So if you have any questions throughout, please feel free to unmute yourself, put your hand up, or put a question in the chat, which I will be monitoring today. We are going to make this session a little bit different, and we shall be using Mentimeter. Not sure if people are familiar with it, but if you go to menti.com, which Jen is just putting in the chat now, go to menti.com and type in the code, which is 53813642. You can either do that on your desktop or on your mobile phone. You can take part in today's session. So basically, Mentimeter will ask you some questions. You can type in your responses, and your responses will come up on the screen while we're going through today. So as you may have noticed, we do record these sessions, and everybody who's booked onto the session will receive a copy of the recording. So if for any reason you have to unexpectedly leave or you want to share with anybody, you can do so. In addition, the recording will also be available on our Trueman Change YouTube page. So just to make you aware, as I said with the recording, it will only pick up those who are speaking. That's how we've set it up. So if you don't want to be recorded and you do have a question, just pop it in the chat. So today's session is about communications and engagement. I am delighted to say that we've been joined by the founder and managing director of Trueman Change, Lucy Trueman, and also we've been joined by Georgia Turner, who is our Trueman Change communication specialist. So Lucy, Georgia, thank you very much for joining in. I wondered, just before we get started, if you'd like to introduce yourself to attendees today, and then we'll move on to the main body of the Change Chat. Lucy, do you want to go first?
Hi everyone, I'm Lucy. I'm the Managing Director and founder of Trueman Change. There's quite a few familiar names on this call, so I think quite a few of you already know me. But my professional background is very much project and change management, and my academic interest is organizational psychology and basically the psychology of change. So I'm very passionate about redesigning how we do change. Is the thing that I'm on at the moment. I've got a book coming out later this year. I've just finished a master's project and I'm hoping to start a PhD soon, which is about understanding the impact of COVID on change management. And a really, really big part of that was that we communicated very, very differently during the pandemic. And I think there's a lot of lessons to be learned there about the importance of good communication and engagement as part of a change program. I'm making excuses here, but I am at a conference. I'm at the PPMA conference in Birmingham at the moment. I've just been given a magic wand as part of a session on happiness. And this is day 3 of a very intense 3-day conference. So if I'm a little bit slower than usual, please forgive me. I've had a couple of late nights.
Georgia, coming on, would you like to introduce yourself? Thanks, Lucy.
Hi, thanks everyone. I'll have that wand, Lucy. Comms is always expected to wave magic wands at things, so we're used to waving those about. Hi everybody. Again, a few friendly names on the call. Good to see you. I'm Georgia Turner, an associate of Trueman Change, and have been for a few months now. My background is a local authority, communications, engagement, consultation, marketing. Over 25 years working in 3 different local authorities, all unitary councils down in the south coast of England. I'm also an LGA associate and I've been freelance for about 2 years now. So do a combination of associate work for Lucy, bit of training, various other bits and pieces, which I'm sure we will perhaps come on to today through some of the examples and experience that I've got if they're relevant. So look forward to chatting with you all.
Great. Thank you both. And before we move on to the Mentimeter questions, so again, just a little nod towards the chat. Lucy, I know you kind of touched on it a little bit there, but would you just like to say why you've chosen comms and engagement as the topic for today's Change Chat?
Yeah, so I think my reflections are that a lot of the profession around project and change management is kind of borrowed from different disciplines. And what we seem to have is this sort of hodgepodge of methodologies where we take from project management for structure, we take some elements from change management, we take some elements from HR and OD and psychology, and comms is a really important one. And I think that when we do change well, then we have that holistic approach, bringing those different professions together. Interestingly, what often happens in organizations is it isn't structured in that way. So what I see, my background is very predominantly local government. What I see in local government is often there will be a HR function and then there will be a separate change function. There will sometimes be a PMO, which is very a project management function, and there will often be a comms function. And these are not necessarily brought together. And I'm not saying that we need to restructure to bring them together, but I do think it is worth reflecting on how do you bring those different disciplines in. And for me, I've done a lot of research and a lot of interviews around speaking to chief execs and senior people about how they made change happen very quickly during the pandemic. And comms was a massive part of that story. So we went overnight from a formal comms kind of way with staff to massive increase in videos, in short, faster paced stuff, more authentic stuff, much more higher frequency of communication. So it seems that we instinctively know when we have to make change happen quickly, and we're not necessarily following a methodology, we instinctively know how important it is to communicate with people and bring them on that journey. But yet when we're in a formal transformation program setting, often comms is the poor relative and they're brought in too late, or they're not brought in at all, or the style of comms is very rigid and not particularly human. So I was really interested, and I know me and Georgia have quite different professional backgrounds, but I'm really interested in having this conversation and finding that common ground, because I think that there's a lot to be learned from, we've sort of made up professions and put them in boxes, but actually there's a huge amount of overlap and a huge amount to be learned by collaborating on issues like this, which is why I was delighted to welcome Georgia to the team, because there's definitely a huge synergy in the work that we do, but also particularly for this call, I think that comms and engagement, and we will ask a couple of questions about what sectors people are from, because we've got quite a mix on this call, but whether you are a comms professional that works on change programs or a change professional that needs to do comms, I think there's a huge overlap between those two professions. So let's get our heads together and see what that looks like.
Absolutely. Thank you very much, Lucy. Right, we are going to now move on to the first Menti question. And I know a few of you have already started filling it in. I'm just going to share my screen. This one is a bit of an icebreaker, mainly to see everything is working correctly and everyone knows how to use Menti. So sorry, I've just gone to click. Jenny, you need to allow me to share my screen. Sorry. The host just needs to allow me to share my screen. Just in the meantime, while we're doing that, I'm getting 6 responses. So seafood is taking the lead. If we're, I will just share my screen now. So can everybody see that? Oh yeah. So the responses are all coming through now. Seafood definitely taking a bit of an early lead. Yeah, no strange ones. There's usually a strange one which I'm able to pick on, but everything seems quite normal with this one. Bacon sarnies. Great stuff. Right, well, we'll move on to the next question. And the next question is, what sector are you from? So can everyone see that my screen has changed there? Yeah, so if you could answer what sector are you from, this will give us an idea of who we have on the call. A lot of local government, public sector, national parks, fire. Great stuff. Right, I'll give that keep on going up. But it's obviously there's consulting, local government, public sector are the big ones, and nice to see everybody on the call. Fire service, small charity, national parks. So we will move on to the next question. And the next question, again, following within the kind of sector question, is who are your key stakeholders? What key stakeholders do you want to engage with? So we've got colleagues, so obviously we've got internal communication there. Members of the public, so obviously going external as well. Members, that's a really interesting one. Government. A really good mix here, Lucy. A lot for Lucy and Georgie to get your teeth into. Great stuff. So colleagues, staff, members are the three that have are obviously in the bigger font there. They're therefore indicating that more people have picked it. But obviously members of the public is another one. So I'm going to stop sharing and move away from Menti for the time being. We will come back to it later on. So if you can keep it open on your page, and I will stop sharing. So any feedback or anything from that, Lucy, Georgia, what you've just seen in regard to their comments?
Well, we don't normally do that, but we did it deliberately this time because we could see when the registrations were coming through that we had quite a diverse group for this session. So I thought it was nice to get that sense of where people are. My background is predominantly local government, but obviously I work in consultancy, and I have worked not for the fire service, but I have worked for the police before. So it will be really interesting to make this into quite an interactive session. So please do feel free to share your reflections, because I'd be quite curious to see whether some of the things we're talking about land differently in different sectors. But yeah, I'm quite excited to get going. Georgia, do you have any reflections?
Yeah, interesting to see members, elected members up there, because we all know that members are not, don't want to say a breed unto themselves, but you know, they are a special case. They're a special governance space in which we operate. So that will be interesting to have that conversation as we get going through the rest of the hour.
Great stuff. So the first question, so open it to the pair of you, and I'll let you decide who wants to open up, who wants to start. So in your opinion, what is the role of comms and engagement in organizations such as the ones that we've just seen? And why is it important to set up and resource communication teams appropriately?
So I think Georgia will have a lot more to say than me about this, being a comms professional, more than myself. I think for me, it's a vague question in a sense, because from a change perspective, comms and engagement can mean different things. And certainly one of the things that I'm seeing in councils at the moment is that often there is a role for comms team as being a kind of externally focused, sometimes a firefighting role. So sometimes very much about, you know, something is about to be in the press, therefore we need to handle that. And often those teams have been cut to the bone, like many teams in the sector have, and are forced into this kind of reactive space, and often don't have the capacity to be able to do the more forward thinking kind of proactive comms, which is certainly what we need in change programs. So what you don't want in a change program is a very bare bones comms strategy where all you're doing is putting an intranet page up with a few FAQs on, when it's a significant change or transformation that's impacting a lot of your staff. And I worry that we've lost, in the way that we've had to make so many cuts in the sector, that we've lost really good people that are able to do that proactive work. But I think, Georgia, your experience of being embedded within comms teams, I'd be curious to hear your reflections on that.
Yeah, thanks, Lucy. Well, we always need to have the capacity for that firefighting. That's kind of a given, because we must do that as part of our role. But I think that the best place for comms is kind of front and center of the organisation. And in comms, we talk a lot about whether you've got a seat at the table, at the leadership table, you know, and it was interesting to see, you know, members were up there on that list, because, you know, what are our relationships like with elected members? Are we meeting with our leaders regularly? Are we at our senior leadership teams advising on issues broader than comms? So those wide policy issues, that voice of that organizational conscience, really is a space that comms can very much step into from an internal and an external perspective. How will this land? Why are we doing it? How not how does this look, but how will this make people feel? What is the impact it's going to have, and how does that actually align with what our corporate narrative is, what our story is that we want to be telling ourselves about our organization, and our priorities? Are we actually delivering the priorities that we've said we want to deliver by doing this? Is it consistent with the direction of travel that we want our organization to go in? And I think, Michael, the question was around where does comms sit, and you know, what did it do, and it's almost reflecting back on what Lucy said at the beginning about kind of change, and comms, and how people work together. Because one of the reasons I enjoy the work I'm doing, with Lucy and others, is around you know, the reflections I've been having on what we mean by change, and actually, yes, organizational change and transformation, huge parts of any organizational vision and efficiency, and ways of tackling some of the difficult financial challenges that we're facing across organizations. Actually, by change, it's anything that's different, anything that is changing. And comms is all across all of that. It could be a new strategy or a new policy. It could be a service review. It might need behavior change from our service users or our customers. It could be structural reform, or it could be organizational change within a department. Change is everywhere, and that means that comms is everywhere. And that's why, you know, I think probably Lucy and I enjoy working with each other so much, because change and comms are like that. You know, but if they're done well between them, they can make such a huge impact internally and externally for people and places, which is kind of what we're all here for.
Right, we've had some comments coming through the chat. So from Helen, who is just clarifying, she said members, but we're a membership body, so not elected members in this case. But equally, well, I think we all know the interest, well, the need for communication around chatting to elected members. Anna has made a really good comment. I lead a function called engagement and innovation, which includes a comms team, but my observation is that the term comms is used as shorthand for something which is much more than that. I think we can all agree with that. Do either of the panel have any comments in regard to that?
I would say so. As a non-comms person, yes, I would absolutely say that. And I think there is a risk of it becoming a bit of a catch-all, but also it kind of needs to become a bit of a catch-all. And I would like to see a cultural shift a little bit, where comms is less of an add-on function of, all right, well, we've got a change program, so now we need a comms person to design us something, and more of a real, what is at the heart of what we're trying to communicate here, and getting communication professionals in at that point. And the reason I say that is we do a lot of work around culture change. And for me, the definitions, a lot of definitions of culture, but the one that has always really stuck for me is that definition of culture is how messages are cascaded around the organization. Now, that's not on the heads of comms solely, because we send messages through our behavior, we send messages through our systems, we send messages through kind of all sorts of symbolic things. But if you're serious about being conscious about your culture, you really have to know what message you are trying to deliberately get out there. And bringing in somebody that's, you know, good at wording stuff at the end to tidy up an intranet page is not the answer. I think comms needs to be, people that understand that concept of messaging need to be at the heart of any change.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
absolutely. Hi, Anna. Thanks for joining us. And yeah, absolutely. And I think that comes across when things go wrong. You often hear about, was it a comms failure? Well, you know, actually that's symptomatic of what is your culture? You know, have you got comms in the room at the beginning? Does your comms function have a crystal ball? No. Was your comms team told and involved? And as Anna has alluded to, what do you mean by your comms team? What is its role? What is its remit? Does it have engagement? Does it have policy? Does it have strategy? Does it have public affairs? Is it influencing up and outside of your organization, as well as internally of your organization? Is it purely service focused, or is it actually aspirational, and kind of inspirational focused in terms of the big vision of that your organization has for the future, for its services, but also for the outcomes it's trying to achieve for whoever your custom base or your service user base are? So it's just symptomatic, really, I think, of how comms does need to be everywhere and anywhere and everywhere all at once. But as soon as it's not, people, it's immediately, was that a comms failure? Well, by that's a much bigger question, and it goes right back to what Lucy was saying about how is your organization work, and how does it manage its kind of narrative and the way it communicates with its people.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm just going to pick up on the comment from Abigail as well, who says the role of internal comms is to create a clear narrative, e.g. case for change and compelling vision for the future, drive connections and integration across the organization, listen to stakeholders and involve audiences in shaping plans. Internal comms is an input. If you get it right, the impact will be higher engagement. I think we can all agree with that. Got some really good comments in here. I'm just because we've obviously only got an hour, I'm just going to move us on to the next stage, which will take us back to Mentimeter again. So I'm just going to share my screen once again. So this is the last question. So the next question is, what is your biggest challenge when attempting to communicate and engage with stakeholders? We've got the first one coming through in regard to timing. Not all have access to PC, not senior enough, different priorities. So we've got not senior enough, lack of insight, timing, technology, different priorities, not all have access to PC, lack of clarity, leadership disconnect, working in silo. Staff doing their own comms, which is really an interesting one.
It's quite interesting that time is on there, which is what we were saying about, in a lot of organizations, there is that lack of capacity to be able to do the forward thinking stuff, which means that the urgent kind of crisis management, firefighting stuff has to take priority.
Yeah, and that point about being senior is a really interesting one, and I kind of goes back to the point I was making earlier on around having a seat at the table and being in the room, and sometimes your organizational structure just isn't going to make that happen. But actually, that's also about what relationships do you have, what influence do you have in the organization as a communications and engagement professional? Who are you working with? How are you seen to be influencing decisions and communication? And is your advice listened to? And one of the things I always used to say when I was in-house, and you'll all recognize this, anyone who's on the call that works in comms, is that we always joke that everyone's a comms expert, as though it's not really a very funny joke, because it's exasperating when you work in comms. But we will frequently know people come to you and they tell you they've decided what the comms solution is. Even though they're not a comms expert at all, I want this. I need the intranet FAQ. I need a press release. Is the or now it's I need a video, or I need a TikTok account, or whatever. When actually, I would say, I just want you to come to me and say, I need advice. I need advice, right? This is my situation. This is the problem I need solving. This is the issue I have. This is the program I'm about to embark on. And I know I need comms input, because comms is a key input. I think, as somebody, Abigail, I think it was posted earlier, comms is a key input. And by getting the inputs right, guess what? We'll get the outputs right, won't we? So, come to me with a query or a question or a problem, and we'll be all over it. Then we'll go and get the data. Someone talked about insight earlier on. Get the data and insight that we can, so we understand the audiences, we know what's going to make them tick, we know what's going to make our message land and resonate, and how our comms can be great and effective. But start with the problem statement and we'll take it from there.
Yeah, absolutely. I think there's one thing we can say as well is with the responses that we've just received is that they all fall under the umbrella of culture, which I know is a big subject and speciality that Lucy has. So, what is the role of comms and engagement when reviewing or trying to improve culture within organisations?
So I touched on it a little bit earlier, and I can see Saran's offered the definition of the way things are done around here, which is a really popular definition. The reason why I favour the messages one is that it puts you in a proactive place of, we can not control is too strong of a word, but we can influence messaging. And what it also enables you to do is find those blind spots. So if you think about cultural issues as usually a contradiction in messaging, so you may have an organisation who is saying, so this is a real example, quite a few years old now actually, but it's always stayed with me, of a council I worked with where they wanted their managers, they felt that they were culturally silo working, empire building, and not necessarily working together across the board. When we applied that definition of messaging and then we went out in search of messages that were contradictory to what they wanted, which some people feel is a negative starting point, but actually looking for contradictory messages enables you to spot where the culture isn't quite working. And one of their contradictory messages was that their job evaluation process literally paid people, awarded you more points, therefore more money, if you were managing more people. So you say that you want to create a culture where you don't see that behavior, but you are quite literally paying people to display that kind of behavior. Now, I'm not saying comms had a role in that decision, not at all, but by looking at it through that lens of, this is about messaging and how certain things, certain decisions, certain processes, certain behaviors send a message, it enables you to get in the driver's seat of really thinking about how you influence that culture. So where does comms and engagement come into that? Well, comms and engagement has to, anybody that's communicating, so not necessarily comms professional, but anybody that is communicating with people in the organization needs to understand that concept and needs to make sure that the messaging that they are putting out is in alignment with the culture that they want to build. So this is where I think there is a bit of an overlap between change, HROD professionals, which Christos touched on, and comms, because you kind of need to understand what are we trying to build here in order to make sure that the messages are communicated in the way that they're not creating any contradictions. So I think it's really important that those people, whatever professional background they're from, have that clarity, which comes from leadership. And then they bring, so, okay, if that's what we're trying to build, then HR know we need to build these kind of terms and conditions and this kind of culture and this way of working. Comms knows we need to build this kind of tone of voice. We need to build these kind of consistency in messaging. And you change people know we need to make sure that all of our projects that we're doing are going in that direction. And I noticed that in the last Mentor Meet where we asked for challenge, clarity came up because it's rare to have that clarity. And I would be interested to hear from other people who are outside of local government. One of the challenges that I think are really in local government is it's so massively diverse. What it does is actually really difficult to build that common narrative. You know, you've got people in the sector that are coming in because they're social workers, and then you've also got refuse collectors. So finding that commonality between those two wildly different roles is a bit of a challenge. And I don't think you necessarily have to put pressure on yourself to have a completely consistent culture. But I think that if you're serious about shaping your culture and deliberately shaping your culture, because you are shaping the culture constantly, whether you're doing it on purpose or not, you may be doing it by accident, but you are doing it. So making sure that comms people are in alignment with that, and also that we're using their, sorry, comms people, using that we are getting out of you, but we're using that specialism and that expertise and that critical thinking around how we are communicating and whether that is in line with the kind of organization we want to build. And I don't see a lot of that happening, which isn't a criticism, but I think it's because of what we've said, that we've cut it to the bone. So comms professionals are just thrown things at the last minute of, can you just tidy that up or get that out, and they're not in the conversation early enough to really be able to use that, the benefit of that expertise in real, let's think very critically about our messaging here. That's where I see the overlap of the professions, and I'm not sure exactly how that needs to work on a day-to-day basis, but I think that we've got people that have got really high level of expertise in terms of communicating messaging, and I'm not sure that we're always using them in a really effective way when we're talking about something as important as culture and organizational change.
Yeah, absolutely. Georgia, just before I come to yourself, I just want to read a comment from Abigail in the chat, and basically, Lucy, can't agree more. I've heard the phrase, you get the culture you reinforce day to day and in your policies and processes. If you don't like it, you need to change those reinforcement mechanisms, like the pay scale, which isn't congruent to the behaviors you want to see.
Yeah, that's why I say look for the contradiction. Because they're blind spots. Nobody did that on purpose. Nobody deliberately does this, but these things develop over time, and it's really, really important to look at them with that critical eye and think, what message is this really sending? How is this shaping the culture?
Yeah, absolutely. Georgia, to come to
Yeah,
yourself.
thank Lucy and everyone. I think some thoughts from me are around, we've talked about that compelling narrative. And very often that kind of organizational vision is driven from the top of an organization. So it can be quite corporate, it can be quite strategic, it can be quite forward looking. As Lucy has mentioned, we've got social workers, we've got refuse operatives, we've got people working in the parks and on the roads. These people have a very different job to the chief executive and a director of comms and even their own head of service. So how do you get that narrative to be relatable, to make your colleagues think this is all about me? I'm contributing to this big thing up here in a way that they understand, that they're inspired by and they're interested in. And that is where comms very much comes in, for the kind of the external focus. But of course, with your policies and your processes, like we were just talking about, again, you've got your organizational values, the how do we do things around here. How do you translate that into language of this is what we do, this is what we don't do? For example, you see that quite often around this is how we behave, this is how we don't behave, in ways that colleagues and staff understand, and that your leaders are, visibly walking the talk. They're doing it. You can display those behaviors. You can see those behaviors. They can, video blog about those behaviors, whatever it is might be that works in your organization, so that content is relatable. And then key to all of that, of course, we're talking about comms and engagement. Those are not one-way processes. It's about the listening. So how do you find those blind spots that Lucy just talked about? How do you know whether your messaging is landing, whether people agree with your values? Of course, ideally, your values don't come from the top. Your values are co-created with your organization, and they're based on the views of all staff at all levels, and you have that kind of diagonal slice that you talk about, all those kind of inputs in creating a values of an organization and a culture. So you're starting from a place of unity and agreement, and therefore those blind spots are just spots. They're not gigantic great pockets, although they may be in some places, but you're starting from a position of co-creation ideally. So actually comms has got a role in listening as well. And going back again to Lucy saying, and how do all these OD and comms and HR and policy and all these guys fit together, and EDI as well, inclusion, have that matrix approach. And sometimes it is important where things sit in an organization. But we do get very hung up about structures and what sits where, when actually we're on the same team. If your team is team culture, actually you can be from comms, you can be from OD, you can be from policy, you can be from chief exec's office, you can be from inclusion. Come together as a team, because actually if you can agree on the end goal, which is we want an inclusive, welcoming, efficient, enjoyable culture here, then you're already working to the same aim. And rather than saying, well, who's in charge and I don't work for you and you can't tell me what to do, I'm not saying that. I'm exaggerating for effect, of course, but I think if you focus on the end game, that does very much help overcome some of those structural barriers which we sometimes face.
Yeah, I do. I totally agree with that. And the other thing that we look at when we look at culture is narratives and stories told. I remember one organisation that we supported where they were thinking about their tolerance to risk, which is something a lot of organisations, they weren't actually a council, but a lot of public sector organisations wrangle with this. Are we too risk averse? Are we too reckless? Where are we on that spectrum? And we did a culture mapping exercise with them, and we reflected on one of the questions we asked staff, because that listening is hugely important, is tell me what stories you hear often, what phrases do you hear often? And one of the phrases that they often heard was, think about what this would look like on the front page of a Daily Mail. Now, that in itself is probably, you know, a good thing to do every now and then. I'm not against that at all. The repetition of that and the frequent repetition of that, actually thinking about, okay, so what is that really communicating? It's really communicating, think very carefully about risk. Now, if you're thinking critically about your risk profile, things like that really matter. And that's where the sort of sense of narratives and language and storytelling, comms people have that expertise. They are able to look at that and decipher it in a way that perhaps chief execs and leaders of other backgrounds are not able. Often and I say this as a business owner, I really struggle with when people talk about the tone of voice of Trueman Change, because it's just my voice. Like, I don't know what, I can't look at it critically. But often in complex organizations, particularly public sector ones, I imagine it's very similar in fire. You sort of trained from quite early on in your career to have a very formal tone of voice. And you lose the awareness of that in the way that I've lost the awareness of what my tone of voice is. It just is what it is. And this is where I think that the comms professionals can really play a role in being that critical friend of thinking about tone, about narrative, about messaging in a way that perhaps the rest of us, it's almost so embedded in our brains we can't even see it. But I don't often see people being used in that way. I did see a talk, which actually, Michael, you were with me at the LGA Transformation Conference, and it escapes me which council it was, but they'd done something specifically around language, where they'd had some language researchers in looking at posters, emails, correspondence, policies, to do exactly that piece of a real critical eye around the language that we're using. And I think stuff like that is really, really powerful. And yeah, but we're keeping our comms teams busy with producing outputs instead of really doing that reflective piece. And I feel like we are missing a bit of a trick there, because we've got that expertise, but we're just not necessarily using it.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it was Surrey, Lucy, but
Yeah.
I might be wrong. And I think we can all relate to that. I work for, as Lucy and Georgie are aware, I worked for a number of years within a local police force, and everything that you've just said there, even though we haven't got police on the call, I can 100% relate to. So we've just got a question from Anna. I'm interested in views on a squad approach to comms change OD culture, and how this can work if staff don't all sit in the same directorate.
I think actually Georgia just talked quite eloquently about that, and it is breaking down some of that approach of directorates. Some of it, and I have been in the midst of setting up transformation programs, needing comms resource, and there being sort of debates and arguments over where that sits. You've kind of got to work with what you're working with, and you could lose a lot of time having arguments over line management when really it's about relationships and people. So I think it is a case of creating an environment where all of those skills are valued equally, and it's a case of let's bring these professions together with a curious mindset, not a power battle mindset of how we can do better and challenge some of these things. But I do fully appreciate that it's easier said than done. Georgia, I don't know what your reflections are, because you did raise that as that's exactly the approach we need to take.
Yeah, I agree, and it will look different everywhere, of course. But yeah, essentially, I do think it is that focus on the end game. What are we trying to achieve here, and also what are our unique skills and contributions we are bringing to this end game? Because yes, we've talked a lot about the similarities, of course, we're in different professions because they're not exactly the same. There is difference there. So what are the nuanced differences and skill sets that we bring as communicators that our colleagues in HR and OD don't have, perhaps? And likewise, what are they bringing that we can benefit from and pull into our comms to make the end game work that we're aiming towards more effective? So it's very much a mindset thing as much as a kind of process thing. It's a mindset thing. Can we all go into this room with the same approach, which is let's get this done. Let's get this done in a productive way, in an efficient way, but hopefully in an empathetic way, and maybe we'll have a bit of fun along the way. Even let's imagine that, even better.
The other way of taking the power battles out of it is to go wider. So when I'm thinking about comms, I will often challenge myself on two professions that absolutely have to get comms right, and that is politicians. Now, we've all got lots of political opinions, I'm sure, but really politicians, it's comms. That's all it is. It's a popularity contest. So what would a politician do in this situation with this message? How would they do it? And the answer to that is repetition, repetition, repetition. What would a professional marketing person do? What would the director of marketing for Coca-Cola do? And again, that would be very conscious repetition. So if you get in a group of people in the room from the same organization, but from different specialisms, rather than necessarily focusing on your difference, maybe do some questioning like that, where you're thinking, okay, well, if we were this type of person or this type of profession, that's a completely different profession, what would we do? What could we bring? Because then you sort of learning together as peers, and that encourages you to be in that curious mindset rather than necessarily, I know about this because I'm HR. It's that more broaden it a bit. So pulling wisdom from different professions, I would say. I'm a massive fan of that. And my approach to change is a combination of project management that comes from engineering, change management that comes from consultancy, psychology. It's a real hodgepodge of different things that I have learned from different professions. And I think if you kind of go into it with no one here is an expert, let's be curious, you will be able to create those relationships more and create it as a playful place rather than a power battle place.
Great. Thank you both. Shifting pace a little bit, we're actually seeing an increase in organizations wanting to do more and engage with communities more. So, however, there are some difficulties in this, with communities not really keen on sharing their awareness, etc. So how would you recommend that organizations, either local authorities or other organizations, approach this type of engagement?
So firstly, I just want to reiterate, massive increase in this, massive. And this started before COVID, but was massively escalated by COVID. So when I was doing my master's, I was looking around for research that had been done on co-production, co-design, and it's still quite thin on the ground, but it did start just before the pandemic. So I think people are recognizing that now. Then the pandemic hit and it was massively escalated because the power was removed in a sense. None of us knew what to do, did we? Let's be honest. And so we got into this headspace of, right, well, what have we got out there? So what community groups? And I've spoken to people that have worked with football clubs to use their grounds to get, 50 different charities all in a space where they could socially distance to create like an emergency temporary food bank that also included people from different partners. And all of that happened in the space of a few days. People managed to build not bricks and mortar hospitals, but create temporary hospital spaces in a matter of 2 or 3 weeks by a massive, massive engagement with partners and communities, and just ensuring that we were able to do that. So the question now is, how do we continue that work? And I think for me, I keep using this word power, but it is absolutely worth thinking about that, because sometimes public sector institutions are seen as institutions with power. We're often located in, kind of slightly intimidating town halls. We don't find them intimidating. In fact, we wish we had shiny new modern offices. But, this kind of, all of this symbolism and this trust issue. So I think all of that does need thinking about, but we are seeing a massive, massive increase in that at the moment. And Georgia is leading quite a bit of work for us on that. So Georgia will be able to give much better hints and tips than me.
Over to you, Georgia.
Yeah, thanks, Lucy. I think it's around through the pandemic, the benefits of that engagement. Like you say, this balance of power shifted massively, didn't it? And local authorities, and we've known for longer than since 2019, really, 2020, really, but really did hit home. We can't just tell. We can't just we're not just this big organization that decides anymore. We need more than just us to make this happen, to achieve what needs to be achieved, and that partnership space that we're working in more and more. So, for example, I'm doing a lot of stakeholder engagement and community engagement work around spatial strategy creation, for example. Well, that's a spatial strategy, but guess what? The councils don't own all the space. They don't own all the land. So unless we're engaging with very diverse stakeholders, including landowners, land managers, land developers, for example, on this one, around what's in that strategy, what are the priorities, what are the measures, what are the interventions that we want to see in there, what is the vision for this strategy, then it's basically just literally only ever going to be a strategy, because you won't have that buy-in, you won't have that advocacy, that understanding, you won't have that input, so that when the strategy is completed, stakeholders will recognize we inputted into that. We had a say here. Oh, yes, that was mine. That relates to me. I wanted that. I support that. Because they will be the ones who own the land, who need to agree that their land is used in whatever way the strategy agrees in the long run. So it's a huge, huge piece of work. I think it's a big capacity issue. I think that's what Lucy's alluding to, that we're seeing a big capacity issue for local authorities, because we do tend to do quite a lot of formal consultation, which isn't quite the same thing. And this strategy I'm working on at the moment, there will be a formal consultation. That's not until next public consultation. That's not until next January. So 6, 7, 8 months earlier, we're already doing a lot of stakeholder engagement, because that's how much input is needed to get this strategy across the line before any of the actual work to implement it begins. So I think that kind of understanding that we can't do this on our own, and the outcomes will be better if we don't try to as well. We don't, going back to Lucy's almost like micro example about disciplines in organizations, I don't know everything about comms because I'm a comms person. Equally, I don't know everything as an organization because I'm the local authority. I don't know best just because I'm the big organization. Actually, this really tiny group over here will know really specifically what a particular demographic needs, or a particular geographic community, or a particular group with protected characteristics, or intersectionality, different characteristics and impacts and situations coming together that have an intersectional impact on particular people, individuals and groups of individuals. That's where really great engagement is going to come into its own, because it will make better services, it will make better outcomes, it will give people better lives. And we're most of us here in the public sector, that's what we're all about, right?
I do just want to pick up on Laura Ann's question, because I know we're getting tight on time. But the question around how do you build trust between the community and organisations, I think this is crucial, and there just isn't a quick fix answer to this, because the hard truth is the vast majority of people out there, and I'm sure you've all got friends and family who don't work in whatever sector you work in, don't understand what the public sector does. They don't understand it. They only understand it when they're in a crisis mode, and even then it's quite difficult to navigate, and they need something urgently. But my dad once said to me, I don't understand how you're making a career out of local government when all they do is potholes. And I'm like, oh my God. But that is a very, very common view. So first of all, they don't understand the organisation. And then second of all, there is a lack of trust. And depending on which part of the public sector you're in, that does vary. We don't have the best press in the country, in the world, in terms of really promoting the work. And equally, in local government, which is where I'm from, we're not very good at promoting the work. So because of all the things we've already said, we are often only in the press when we're firefighting about we've had to make cuts or some sort of difficult decision. So there is a lack of trust. I do think that, first of all, it is a human skill building trust. So you can't hide behind the fact that there isn't that trust. You've just got to get out there and talk to people, and you will build based on human relationships. That will be what changes their mind. And Secondly, and I know I would say this because I'm a consultant, but sometimes this is the benefit with outsourcing it and using an external company, because when we go in, although they know that we've been asked by the council to do the work, we are in a position to hold those conversations in a slightly different way. But some really positive stuff I've seen, and this was years ago, and I can't remember which council it was one in the Northwest, where they did stuff around activity. So rather than having a formal kind of in the council town hall sort of conversation, they built a castle out of cardboard. It doesn't have to be that, it can be any activity, but they encouraged people from the community to come and help build this castle out of cardboard. And they had kids there, they had older people, and people just turned up, and it was just kind of a bit of fun of, right, now while they were doing that, and it was perceived by the community to be sort of a fun little activity, the council people were engaging and asking them, so tell me about your life. So like, you know, what issues have you got? And so it almost removed all of that formality and made it into a fun activity. So think about your location, your activity, go to where the people are. When we are paid to do engagement on behalf of councils, we don't do that in the council buildings. We will look for, okay, so what community groups are there? What if we're targeting a specific community? Is that a religious location? Is it, you know, where are these people? Let's go there. And all the usual practical stuff that you've got to think about, like timing and language barriers and so on and so forth. But yeah, I think you've got to accept that you have to build that trust, but I don't think there is a shortcut. I think it is human to human contact.
Yeah,
Yeah,
absolutely.
it definitely is human to human contact. And one of the things that is hopefully quite common practice, or becoming more prevalent now, is really valuing, and it definitely came out of the pandemic for sure, particularly with some of those communities who were really, really distrustful of government and NHS and council messaging, is working with trusted voices. You know that accepting there will be some groups who, you know, with the best will in the world, they're never going to be council advocates for a huge faceless organization. But if you can work with their community leaders, that their trusted voices, and again, it's easier said than done. It takes a lot, as Lucy says, there's no shortcut, there's no quick fix to it, but start with them, invest in those relationships, show empathy, show that you know answer their what's in it for me question. You know, what's in it for them isn't come and talk to the council because we're the council and want you to talk to us. You know, that's not what's in it for them. How is what you're proposing going to benefit their communities? Prove to them why you care about their communities. Prove to them that you're on the same page as them in terms of outcomes and positivity and inclusivity, and getting their, you know, meeting their objectives and their aims and solving a problem that they might have. Prove useful, because their job isn't to be your voice, or be our voice. That's not their job. Their job is to represent their communities. So find common ground, and as Lucy says, that's a person to person thing. It's not a great big council to a small community group thing. It starts with people every day of the week.
Absolutely. Thank you both. In regard to your pothole comment, Lucy, I met somebody yesterday from a council who took the lanyard off when they left the building, and they said the reason they do that is because everyone just stops her and asks about potholes. So definitely still carried on. So with about 3 or 4 minutes left, Lucy, Georgia, if you had to give one main takeaway for people to take from today, I know we've talked about a lot and it's been really interesting. What would be your one big takeaway?
So as a change person, not a comms person, whenever I'm thinking about comms, I always push people to answer the question, what will be different? And answer that question from multiple perspectives before you even think about how you're going to communicate. So if you've got an internal change program, you need to be clear on what will be different for staff, what will be different for elected members, what will be different for communities, what will be different for managers, what will be different for particular service user groups, whatever that looks like. Make sure you can answer that question, and then your comms needs to be anchored around the answer to that question, which is similar to what Georgia was saying in the What's in It for Me. I see so many change programs communicate on a project basis where they just say, right, well, we'll have an intranet page, we'll put a Gantt chart up, we'll tell everybody there's been a board meeting and a decision made. Nobody cares. What will be different for the people that you're communicating with about the change, and make sure that you are talking about that and not your process of getting to there, because they don't care about that. That would be my from a change perspective. I do just want to flag that I am in a building that have warned me that there is a fire alarm test at 1 o'clock, so I may mute just before on. If it comes out, if I don't speak, that's why, because it's
Georgia, what would be your takeaway?
It's very similar to Lucy's actually, although it's probably going even a step further, which is understanding what will be different and then framing that in the language of your audience. Ask yourself, so what? So what there's a new system that you've got to use? So what that there's a new building you've got to go to? So what that you're delivering a service differently? What is in it for you? Frame it in that way, because that way it's relate. And when I say frame it, I don't just mean the language, I mean the delivery mechanism, the platform. That might be face to face, it might be video, it might be vlogging, it might be an email, it might be all sorts of millions of things, and it probably will be cascaded through methods other than the council, particularly if it's external. It'll be line managers, get in with the line managers for sure, always with internal comms. We all know that. But yeah, I would say take it a step further, answer the so what question and a what's in it for me question, and frame it in a way that it's going to land with your audience, not necessarily that the chief executive thinks sounds good.
Great. Thank you, Georgia. Thank you, Lucy. We're getting some really nice comments coming through as I'll just bring a close to today's change chat. So just wanted to say thank you again to Lucy and Georgia. Before we finish, just a couple of dates for the diary. Friday the 7th of June, we've got our next change chat, which is on getting it done. And then Friday the 12th of July, we've got the people side of change. These are and while I'm speaking, Jenny's just adding these the links into the chat if you want to book on now, or alternatively, links can be found on our website or our social media platforms. So as I mentioned at the start of the session, you will now all receive an email probably in the middle of the week, which will have a copy of the recording of today's session. I also wanted to make you aware, as Lucy touched on before, that she has written a report regarding change in a post-COVID world, which is available on our website. It's an absolutely brilliant piece of research, and I'd highly recommend if people want to give it a read. We're also advertising it on our social media platforms as well. And finally, if you would like to have a chat with Lucy or Georgia about today, or Lucy's report, or any of the services that Trueman Change offer, please get in touch and that can be arranged. Doesn't look like we've got any further questions coming in on the chat. So just wanted to say once again, thank you all for coming. Thank you to Lucy. Thank you to Georgia. And we will see you at the next change chat.
Thanks,
Thanks, everyone. Bye.